A demon that dwells here has one of the 8 soul cords. Search well for it. Perhaps you cannot defeat this one with blades, Raiko.
Throughout its entire existence, FromSoftware has had a penchant for dark fantasy settings. While this may not be unheard of for many developers that originated in the 80s and 90s, the bleakness of FromSoftware's worlds has been a staple throughout their production history. And mech games. And probably shovelware. Might be good, doesn't matter. The point is, when you consider what From were doing for their first 15 years in operation, it's easy to see that the Souls series wasn't an accident. Lightning would eventually strike, but in 2002, Microsoft's new Xbox wouldn't be the lightning rod. While many might be familiar with the King's Field series, its first and only release post-millennium, King's Field 4, had left audiences disappointed. With middling to poor reviews, the production team had to find a new direction for their fantasy action games to go. And with the success of Capcom's new hack-and-slash property, Devil May Cry, it became clear which direction From should move. 14 months after King's Field 4's release came Otogi, Myth of Demons. With a slashy, combo-driven action system combined with FromSoftware's signature post-apocalyptic fantasy setting, Otogi boasted almost 30 levels and stunning environmental destructibility. The game's visuals are still excellent, and at the time, they were award-winning. It even featured RPG elements and built-in speedrunning facilitation for broader appeal. So many things were set up for Otogi to be From's biggest hit. But a simple question slipped the minds of every person involved in bringing Otogi to the world. Is it enjoyable? While video games don't always have to be fun to be widely considered evocative experiences, the ones that shirk the fun requirement do so to facilitate artistic messages. Games like Spec Ops: The Line, Pathologic, and Florence exist to provide commentary and subvert video game tropes, and use the interactive nature to drive a strong sense of immersion, resulting in a delivery that resonates more deeply than a film might. There is also the ability to enjoy something without finding it fun. One might enjoy a novel, or indulge in their favourite sad music, but describing those activities as fun would be untrue. Dark Souls itself encapsulates this for a more relevant example. Otogi is imbalanced within these constraints. UI elements like a hit counter for combos and the end screen to levels would imply that Otogi is trying to invoke an arcade style despite its grim tone. That end screen also features a timer and grades the player on the number of destructible objects they've destroyed throughout the level. On the other hand, whenever Raiko is hit, he flinches for a relatively long time, which, when combined with the massive quantity of enemies, can cause the player to be killed quite quickly. Also, Raiko's attacks aren't particularly effective at dealing with the groups. The sweeps aren't wide, enemies will fall out of the combos, and after the 4-move combo has ended, Raiko has to wait a significant portion of lag before he is able to continue attacking. So, avoiding the enemies is the most effective way of completing objectives, especially considering how many of those enemies have attacks that could potentially be lethal from 1 or 2 hits. So which is it? Are players supposed to swashbuckle into the thick of battle, or skitter around the edge as they desperately avoid pressing an attack button? Let's start from the bottom. The most integral part to hack-and-slash games are the controls. Without competent controls, the game's success disintegrates, so it's imperative that the controls work properly. So, Raiko's movement speed is adequate? There's no input delay, and being able to double jump is great. The right stick pivots the camera around Raiko instead of turning the viewport in the direction the stick is pressed, which is unfamiliar but functional. There are light and heavy attacks, light attacks being required to begin comboing enemies at all, and heavy attacks having the ability to smash giant holes in the terrain as well as knock enemies down. The right trigger dashes, but not really. With magic, it raises Raiko's movement speed really high for a moment, makes the model invisible, and spams a bunch of particles. It isn't a dodge roll, despite looking like one. The left trigger is for the lock-on mechanic, and it sucks. When locked on, attacks and dashes will mostly go toward the center of the camera. There's a short delay between the locked target moving off screen and the camera reacting, so those attacks and dashes will just totally be off target. It also picks lock targets based on distance to Raiko, rather than their relativity to the center of the screen. So an enemy appearing to one side just before the trigger is pressed can cause the camera to slowly lope around to the nearest enemy. Raiko can also cast spells. A common gameplay feature in hack-and-slash games is the ability to string moves together to juggle enemies in the air. This works great when the enemy doesn't want to be in the air. Almost all of the enemies in Otogi fly, and the ones which don't fly are giant demon things and these stone lions, which are too heavy to juggle. Can't really knock enemies into a vulnerable state in the air if that's where they live, or cannot be knocked into the air. Attack combinations are also 4 total moves before Raiko has to take a hit from his inhaler, which means that plastic teardrop creature can float away and escape your reach. Additionally, as the game progresses, some enemies gain the ability to block your attacks. If you are swinging at 3 demon birds, and one of them happens to be facing you, then the attack is nullified, and Raiko reaches for his inhaler early. And those 2 birds just get to shoot you for free. If a level's objective is not to kill every enemy within it, running by them is by far the most viable option. But Otogi isn't a run and hide, which highlights the failure in the direction of this game. The enemies have too much health. The player's attacks don't arc widely enough. Wow, that is way too much hit stun. So far I've made more succinct videos, because at the end of each I recommend playing the game, and admittedly it's unlikely that everyone has the means to acquire an Xbox and a copy of this game. I still have to say, it isn't worth it. As an interesting investigation into FromSoftware's history, I'd say viewing this video is sufficient to form an understanding of Otogi. Because while the gusty wind level, with its aggravating wind mechanic, well, the wind sound effect that was mixed way too loud is a low point, and the flying centipede boss just kinda running away isn't amazing.
To your soul. Now it shall begin.
The slime boat level exists, and it is utterly preposterous. Much maligned auto-scroller levels are probably most at home within Otogi's action style, but the stakes are usually lower, and the camera isn't one of the enemies. Raiko must ride a boat down a straight path, batting randomly landing slime enemies from the boat. If there are too many slimes on the front or rear of the boat, it will sink and Raiko will be killed. The boat's geometry is not ideal for this kind of battle, as there is a large box in the center preventing slimes from being pushed long ways across the boat. Moreover, there are railings on the side of the boat which the slimes can get stuck in. While it is possible to hit slimes from the boat with a single attack, if they are in an area where rails would prevent them from falling off of the boat, then the player has to fully kill the slime, which takes multiple combos to do. If the player has failed to rid the boat of every slime by the time the boat reaches the end of the journey, a mega slime lands on the boat and causes it to immediately sink, killing Raiko. And if the player does not kill the mega slime within a few seconds of it landing on the boat, and other slimes manage to land on the boat within that time, the boat sinks and Raiko dies. Both times I killed the big slime, the boat sank. The second time, I must have won the coin toss and moved on to the next stage. As the game begins to conclude, an enemy known as an MOS begins to become particularly common. These enemies are floating symbol things with a spin attack that almost kills the player if it hits, and a projectile that almost kills the player if it hits. These things are spammed throughout the last couple of levels. Otogi's penultimate level is a boss rush, except every boss room and every hallway between the boss rooms is infested with these MOS things. Most bosses are particularly susceptible to being stun-locked by jump-heavy attacks, meaning that the most dangerous part of this boss rush isn't the bosses at all. Otogi, Myth of Demons, lacks quality, direction, and polish. With a little more care, a lot of these frustrations could have been ironed out, and this video would be about a pretty worthwhile trip into the past. There are so many things within Otogi that look like progenitors to what would become FromSoftware's recent incredible games. There are even familiar sound effects. But when you look at the quantity of projects they were pushing out around this era, it's clear that something like Otogi wouldn't receive the attention it truly needed to become a timeless classic. From really could have hit their stride 7 years earlier if they had just put a little more care into the game that they were developing. And as frustrating as this game is to play, it's the missed potential for it to be incredible that is the most frustrating of all. Thanks for your time. I know I missed my opportunity to hitch myself to the Dark Souls adulation train that seems to have launched a number of fantastic video game analysts, but maybe I'll get to that someday. Instead, I'm going to be playing something nobody's thought about after they uploaded it to some online stores.